Hello, ladies, gentlemen, and that Technicolor rainbow in between. Today I'm going to try to form a tier list of every single movie in the Walt Disney Animation Studios canon. Well, except for one, but I'll get to that. So before I get started, just a few things I need to note. One is that, I probably look even worse than the last time I made a video. Can't get rid of this thing. It's never going away. The second thing is, this selection does not include the latest Disney film, Raya and the Last Dragon, but I also haven't seen that film yet, so good for both of us, really. And finally, and most importantly, this is going to be a very long one, because there are a lot of movies here, and I'm probably going to give at least some words on what I think of them. And now that that's out of the way, let's get started. And I'm going to do this in chronological order, by the way, not necessarily the exact order that this puts them in. So, of course, that means we start with Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. This is going in A tier. Now, I think we all know the historical significance of Snow White. It was the very first Walt Disney animated movie ever made. One of the first, not the first, full-length animated films to be released in theaters. The most important animated movie of all time. On its own, it probably is not as great as you might expect if you were to sit down and watch it, but I do think it holds up very well outside of just being a milestone. It's a very pleasant experience in its own. But things only get better from there because the next film is Pinocchio, which goes into S tier because it's one of the best movies the studio has ever made. And see, something that you might notice about Pinocchio if you watch it when you get older is that it is a very seriously messed up movie. If you look at everything that happens, where you have like the whale, you have the two con men who get away with everything they do. There's everything related to Pleasure Island. That is the stuff of nightmares. Every single thing that happens with those, none of it gets solved or defeated. The bad things continue to be bad things in the world. And things only turn out well for our main character. Now, that's not something you see in modern movies, now is it? At least not for this demographic. And there's also the song we get from this movie, which, yeah, it's not the most realistic thing in the world. You can't get whatever you want by wishing for it, but that's not really what it is, because as a certain someone else on YouTube said, it's more of a symbol of hope. And do with that as you will. Okay, next is Fantasia. I'm gonna get some real crap for this, but I'm only putting Fantasia in B tier right now. Now, I get why everyone really, really loves this movie, because it's beautiful to look at and beautiful to listen to, and it's amazing how they managed to make the animation sync with the music as well as it does. But I don't quite understand how it's at the top of as many rankings as I've seen it be, and I personally need a more straightforward narrative. So this just isn't 100% satisfying, and I respect it a lot more than I like it, and it's objectively better a lot more than I personally enjoy it. Okay, I know that the next one after that is Dumbo. I'm putting this in S tier. Now, I'll admit this movie hasn't aged that well. There are some questionable moments in it that I'm not sure I can bring out because they might offend certain people. And yes, that is a problem. But aside from that, I think the movie holds up very well because, well, again, aside from everything I just said, because there's something about it I can't quite describe. It just feels, well, it feels dour but hopeful at the same time, in that everything is against Dumbo himself. But when the moral comes into play, it feels, well, this might be something of a pun given what this movie is known for, but uplifting because of what he's finally able to accomplish in the end, as unrealistic as it is. And I'm honestly just very charmed by this movie. I was very taken aback by it when I first saw it. I was not expecting it to be as good as it is. Okay, next is Bambi. Not entirely sure if I want this in a low S or high A tier. Um, for now, I'm going to put it in A because it's not quite my favorite. It is a great movie. It's a great coming of age story. It's beautiful. I like the characters. And yes, there's of course that now infamous death scene. But let's not kid ourselves. It could be a lot more powerful, and it's followed up immediately by that little bit with the little birdies and that la 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 music playing, which makes it harder to take seriously, if I'm being honest. And it's not as powerful as a certain other death of a family member, specifically parent, in a Disney film. We'll get to that, and you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. And there are parts of it that are admittedly just a little boring, but that's, again, probably a personal thing. And so these five movies here are what are referred to as the golden age of Disney, back when it was in its prime, because right after that, the six movies Disney would make were movies called package films. And it's kind of hard to think of them as real movies because they're almost not. They're specifically series of pieces of animation. They could be stories or just Fantasia esque animation set to music pieces. And that actually sums it up pretty well. They were probably, I could be wrong about this, but they were probably trying to be something along the lines of Fantasia to pull themselves out of whatever ashes they might have found themselves in at the time, because I quite honestly don't know all of the details. And the first of these was Saludos Amigos, which I'm putting in C. This movie's really short. It's partially live action, honestly. Um, some classic Disney characters are in it, others aren't. And you're going to hear me say this with some of the other package films, but it's honestly more boring than anything else. There's also The Three Caballeros, which is not a sequel, but almost kind of a follow up to Saludos Amigos. It goes in D tier. because this movie is both boring but bizarre at the same time. Because the series of animated segments that make up the movie are not interesting, aside from maybe in the visuals department. But then with things regarding these characters, it gets really, really insane because you probably won't believe me when I say this, but this here is a movie that ends with Donald Duck getting firecrackers shoved up his ass. I am not joking. I could not think of that no matter how drunk or high I would be. It was not fun. As fun to watch as that might sound to some of you, to which I say, what is wrong with you? Okay, the next one was Make My Music. This one's a little different because there were more stories to these segments, and they were more entertaining, but more in comparison to anything else. And again, they only make enough of a better product to go in C tier, just above the other two so far. And for quite a while, my least favorite of the packaged films was The Three Caballeros, but after thinking about it, fun and fancy-free is not better. It is probably the worst. I'm putting it in E tier, and for those of you wondering why there's an E tier, it's because I don't think you can just go right from D to F, because F is obviously failing, but I think D is just the lowest possible you can get by passing, and E is for bad movies. This is a bad movie. This is where I choose to put it. Even though D is somewhat subpar. It's mediocre, let's say. The next one is Melody Time, which is kind of a slightly better clone of Make My Music. And finally, a mess. I'll get to that. The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad. It's the best of the package films, and it's decent enough, but I'm putting it in a high C tier. For now, it tells the stories of The Wind in the Willows and The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. Both of those are told well. They're fun for the most part. I have my own issues because again, it's not really one cohesive narrative. It's two different stories, and I'd be fine watching one of those as just an individual short. But as a movie, I don't think it works as well. And from here on out, I'm pretty sure this goes in chronological order, so it would be easier. Okay, so now we enter the Silver Age when Disney was back in business. It was making the big bucks again. It was pumping out a lot of those so-called classics, but I'll be the judge of that. I'm the one making this video. The first of these was Cinderella. Now, I do think this movie is a little overrated. That's why I'm not putting it any higher. But there is something I'd like to say about it. People give Cinderella herself flack for just one day getting what she wants and getting to live with a prince and be happy for the rest of her life just for almost no reason, when that is absolutely not what happens. Because for those who say that, they had to have not been paying attention. Because for this whole movie, Cinderella has been working her ass off and has had to have tolerated the near abuse of those in her household. So she deserves everything she gets. And she doesn't want like a guy either. She didn't intend to meet the prince. She just wanted a nice time. She wanted a night out, and that's what she got. And she got her happily ever after, and she deserved it. So that's the first time probably going to have to defend one of these Disney princesses because of all of the flack people give them now. Alice in Wonderland. This is the most overrated Disney movie, in my opinion. And people are going to be mad at me for that. And okay, this movie, I did put it in C tier, but not all of the movies I put in this tier are necessarily only average. Some are just a little bit more so, just a little bit above. And I perfectly understand what Alice in Wonderland is. It's not supposed to make sense. It's not supposed to have a cohesive story. It's supposed to be a series of random events because that's what Alice in Wonderland is. That's what the book is. That's the whole point. I understand. I respect that. I respect it if you like it. And objectively, it works. I'm just not the biggest fan of it. And yet, the live action Tim Burton version fails at that miserably because it completely misunderstands that Alice in Wonderland is supposed to be a random series of events, and it turned it into a generic war story, complete with a chosen one prophecy. I mean, what? Uh, yeah, that's its own topic for another day. Okay, we've got Peter Pan. Putting this in B tier. I probably shouldn't like this movie as much as I do, even though it is very popular and beloved by a lot of people, because, like a few other movies here, it hasn't aged well. Specifically because of that one infamous bit that, again, I don't know if I can talk about. You all know what I'm talking about, though, right? Okay, right, good. And not all of the characters are as likable as you might remember, but it's still pretty enjoyable to me, and it definitely is to a lot of other people. Okay, now we have Lady and the Tramp. I'm putting this in A tier. Because it's, again, I'll bring this back. It's just charming. It's a charming movie. Even though, if you think about it, it's almost kind of a rom-com, except not so much calm. As dumb as a term as that is. But it's not completely cliche either, and I like the characters. And it was one that I watched a few times when I was younger. Okay, Sleeping Beauty. Surprisingly, I'm going to put this above Snow White because it's just more engaging to me, even though Aurora might just be the worst Disney princess because there is nothing to her at all. And I'm not just talking about the fact that she spends, what, a third half of the movie sleeping? No, she has no personality, neither does the prince. The whole movie is carried by the fairies and Maleficent, but thankfully those are great characters, and it also probably has at least one of the best climaxes of any of these movies. And it has a unique animation style. Okay, 101 Dalmatians goes in B tier. It's hard to describe. It's probably something I've said too many times already. But it's true because this one in particular is a little weird because it doesn't really feel as much as a like a Disney movie, if that makes any sense, as the others before it did. and just especially in the way it looked. If you take a look at like a video or a screenshot from this movie now, you'll notice it looks flat almost, like more so. I can't quite describe it, but I know it involves a certain process called Xerox. I'm not exactly an actual animating aficionado, as um, quite to your disappointment, because I haven't really taken it upon myself to actually do it firsthand. All right, the sword in the stone goes in C tier because again, it doesn't have much of a narrative. It's just kind of um, main character gets in danger, danger is solved. Repeat this at least twice. Then the actual sword in the stone part doesn't happen until the very end. It had nothing to do with the movie until that part. It's just a very weirdly put together movie. And if people remember it a lot and regard it as a classic, I have to honestly wonder why. Okay, The Jungle Book. This goes in A tier. I really liked this as a kid, I really like it now. And I'm calling it the same things I've been calling a lot of the other movies so far. It's just very charming, it's very entertaining. A lot of, if not all of the characters are very fun to watch, very likable. The songs, I'm surprised I haven't talked about the songs about many of these movies, about any of these movies yet. It has one of the best soundtracks out of any Disney movie. So much so that even, um, I mean, the song I Want to Be Like You. That song is so good that even Christopher Walken singing it cut from the live action remake, that version is actually okay. It's just that in the context of that remake, it sucks. Okay, now we enter a period called the Bronze Age, or the Dark Age, as others call it, because this was around the period of time where Walt Disney sadly died, and the studio went into a downward spiral, and they released a series of movies that I don't believe did very well. I know for a fact that some didn't. I know for a fact that one in particular didn't, and I'll get to that. But a lot of them just weren't all that interesting. Case in point, this first one, The Aristocats, which goes in D tier because it's just very, very uninteresting. It's a piece of fluff that you can put on for your kids and it'll entertain them for an hour and a half, but you probably won't get much out of it if you watch it yourself. Okay, Robin Hood. Putting this in B. This is one of the better ones from the era. It's kind of like the Jungle Book, where it's just fun, it's entertaining, but there's not as much of because yes, the Jungle Book is rather laid back in terms of story, but Robin Hood is even more so at the cost of enjoyment, honestly. And then there's always the thing that everyone notes that it constantly reuses animation and it's very noticeable. Okay, this is the one I was slipping up on earlier, The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh. This is the best movie from the Bronze Age, and I'm putting it in A tier. As childish as that might seem, because I personally really like Winnie the Pooh. I know how dumb that sounds to some people, but I think it has this very, I have to use this word again, I'm sorry, it has a very charming, childlike wonder to it. And has this feeling of innocence to it that I can't quite describe, but It's really just untouchable in that sense. I don't want to make fun of it because it just seems wrong to do so, even if it's really not the greatest movie ever made. Because of course it's not, but it is the best from this period of time. Okay, now The Rescuers, which is a movie I really don't care about, kind of in the along the lines of the Aristocats. It's boring. It's mostly just cutesiness for the kids. It's very not interesting, kind of weirdly put together, not even that nice to look at. You can skip it. Okay, The Fox and the Hound. Now, this is one that a lot of people defend as underrated. I see why. There's a lot to like about it, but honestly, I'm putting it in C tier because I just have my own issues with it. Because, yeah, I admire it for being essentially the only Disney movie that doesn't have a happy ending, but the story could definitely be a lot stronger by having certain things being changed. And a lot of people think that the scene where the the widow lets Todd back into the wild is very emotional and sad. I disagree because it does not make any sense because he's not going to live out there. He's You're making him more vulnerable to being hunted and killed. You're putting him in more danger, you idiot. I'm sorry, that's just something I don't get why people want, like, don't pick up on. Okay, here we go. The Black Cauldron. This is that movie that was almost the killing blow to Disney. It is at least one of their lowest grossing movies that they've made. I don't know if it's still their lowest grossing, but it did so poorly that it dragged the studio to a new low. It lost on opening weekend to the Care Bears movie. Yes, really. So it goes in E tier. It's the worst out of these Dark Age, Bronze Age, whatever you want to call it, movies. And now we've got two movies that I'm going to call bad for now. Okay, we've got The Great Mouse Detective. This is the second best movie from this period. It's also one that people defend as underrated, but unlike The Fox and the Hound, I think it deserves it because I really like Basil. I really like Radigan. I think Radigan is a great villain. It's a very fun movie, even though there isn't really that much of a mystery to it, surprisingly, even though it's called The Great Mouse Detective, because we see what's happening with Radigan, and we know what his plan is and all of that, if you think about it. Okay, Oliver and Company goes in C tier, trying to decide exactly where. I'm gonna put it here for now. This isn't a bad movie, it just doesn't get a lot of emotion out of me. I don't find that many of the characters to be very entertaining. I think they're kind of obnoxious, honestly. Um, the song "Why Should I Worry" is pretty good, though. I'll give it that. And New York is an interesting setting for a Disney movie, at least at the time. Okay, finally we enter the Disney Renaissance. When Disney got back into its prime, it released a lot of movies that are called classics now. Some of their highest grossing, some of their most beloved, some of my favorite anyway. And it all started with The Little Mermaid, which is going in S tier. Now, look, I know a lot of people hate Ariel, and that's fine, you're allowed to, but look, yes, she's a girl who gave up something as crucial as her voice for a man that she only just met. Yes, that is stupid, but that doesn't mean that every single girl who watches it is supposed to do it, because that is stupid. And she does have personality outside of that. So it's not like that's all there is to her. And obviously, it's beautifully animated. It's one of the best looking movies this studio has ever made, honestly. It has a great soundtrack. It has a great villain. Ursula is one of my favorite Disney villains. It's one of my favorites. The Rescuers Down Under is the first and only one of the few movies Disney has made in its actual canon that is a sequel, and it is miles better than the first movie. It's going in B tier. I'm just not sure exactly what movies it goes above or below. It's going here for now. The animation is gorgeous. The setting is interesting with Australia, although it is strange. Like, out of all movies to make a sequel to for the first time, why The Rescuers? I mean, I already said my piece about that movie. Okay. Beauty and the Beast. S tier. I don't think there's much about this movie I can really say that isn't a complete repeat of what everyone else has said, because it's honestly almost perfect. There's a reason why it was the first and only movie from the Disney canon to be nominated for Best Picture, the first of 3 animated movies to be nominated for Best Picture, and Stockholm Syndrome thing is really not true, because it's not like she's treating him with kindness the minute she gets there. It's not like she's a doormat. It's kind of like the Cinderella thing, where if you think that you weren't paying attention. Aladdin, also right to S tier. Right to the top. I'm honestly having less and less to say about these movies as I go on. But I think in a few ways, if you think about it, Aladdin is kind of the first fully comedic Disney movie, where if you were to apply a genre to it, you might actually refer to it as a comedy. I'm not really sure about that, but that's something I kind of think. Also, the genie is my favorite Disney character, and rest in peace, Robin Williams. As if that needed to be said. I hope I didn't sound like an asshole for saying that last part. The Lion King. Straight up to S tier. This is my favorite Disney movie. This is one of my favorite movies of all time. I've watched it more than literally any other movie. I can quote it almost verbatim. I have absolutely nothing else to say about it that has not been said already. So let's move on. Pocahontas. This goes in D tier. This is easily the worst film from the Disney Renaissance. It's the only one I don't care about. It's honestly, it's childish and it's boring as tar. The characters are equally dull. Pocahontas is kind of neck and neck with Aurora as the worst Disney princess, just out of pure lack of personality. Although, honestly, John Smith is the worst character, because not only is he boring, but he's honestly kind of a creep in a way. And it's stupid how they try to portray this conflict from both sides, because in context of history, it really doesn't work that way. It didn't work that way. It doesn't work that way in the movie either. It, it works against the movie. It's really not. I don't understand how I thought this movie was actually good the first time I watched it, because it does not hold up well. Next is The Hunchback of Notre Dame. I'm putting this in S tier. I think this is the most underrated Disney movie. It's also probably the darkest, although I won't deny it does have tonal issues. It does have parts where it kind of stops being dark just to insert something a lot more goofy, because the movie gets afraid that it's being too dark for the kids. I get why they did that, but it is a problem. But I am one of those people who will defend it and will say that it needs a lot more attention. And it's one of my personal favorites. Hercules, I really like this one. It's going in B tier. Not sure if I want it there. Let's put it here for now. It's very weird, honestly, because if you hear Disney's Hercules, you probably imagine something very big and epic. This grand telling of this demigod and his journey and his fights with monsters and everything regarding Greek mythology, but instead you get this strangely, honestly, kind of goofy, cartoony story that's very much comedic, and with all the honestly strange musical choices that oddly work in its favor, but it's not an exceptionally great movie. Although, yeah, Hades is a great villain, I'll give you that. I must sound very negative right now, I'm sorry. Just, you might have noticed this by now, but I'm not the most enthusiastic person in the world. Okay, Mulan. Goes in A tier. Okay, this is essentially girl power the movie. But sometimes we need that, and it tells that story honestly better than any other movie has, maybe ever will. Mulan herself is one of the best Disney heroines. I have mixed feelings about Mushu, by the way. I used to really like him. Now I think he's a bit out of place within the setting. I still like him as a whole, though. And I'm going to address something that some people have kind of pointed out about Mulan, which is, if you want, you can kind of view it as almost something of a trans allegory, because apparently to some, Mulan is a trans icon, and that's because it's a movie about a woman pretending to be a man, being forced to pretend to be a man despite not exactly enjoying it. So it's easy to see why people would think that upon examination, especially take a look at the song Reflection. Look at some of the lyrics. Who is that girl I see staring straight back at me? Why is my reflection someone I don't know? Speaks for itself, doesn't it? And here we go. Tarzan was the last movie in the Disney Renaissance. I think I'm gonna put it in A for now. Um, it's it's a very entertaining and emotional story. I think Tarzan himself is a very good character. I like his romance with Jane a lot. That's the best thing about the movie. It's beautifully animated. I I like Phil Collins' songs more than most, although I kind of wish they were actually sung by the characters. And it has one of the most gruesome deaths in any Disney movie. Like, when's the last time you saw a character in a Disney movie accidentally hang themselves? Now we enter the post Renaissance era, where Disney started to lose themselves again and enter a very unpleasant state, where hand drawn animation was starting to go out the window with Pixar dominating the industry and DreamWorks coming into the limelight. And eventually they'd release a certain movie called Shrek, which not only knocked Disney down several pegs with some merciless bashing, but also was an enormous success and put DreamWorks on the map, which led to other animation studios emerging from the ether. And everything was relying on CGI. And so eventually Disney felt the need to. They did this after Fantasia 2000, which goes in B tier. I personally like this one. Um, it does have some very stupid moments with the host, who is Steve Martin, by the way. In between the animated segments, it is very childish and fails at being comedic, but the segments there are some of them are honestly, I'd argue some of them are almost as good, if not better, than a lot of the ones in Fantasia. Specifically, the Firebird Suite and Rhapsody in Blue. I really like that. I really like those two quite a bit. So the first Disney film to really focus on CGI was Dinosaur, even though it used live action backgrounds. It goes in D tier because it is so completely and utterly dull. Story wise, character wise, and animation wise, also in some areas. Because, well, I say animation loosely because, the backgrounds are live action. Because when it's something like a jungle, like a forest, or even some kind of wetland, and it's lush and green, then it's great, then it looks great. But then a lot of it is desert and like plain and just lots of tans and browns and not very pleasant to look at. And it's just walking through the desert in a lot of it. The characters aren't very interesting. Okay, The Emperor's New Groove. Quite the following this movie has gotten. No? Well, I'm putting it in A tier because I really, really like it. It's really kind of an outlier, isn't it, among the Disney canon? Because it's very um, Looney Tunes-ish. It's almost DreamWorks-esque in a way. Although that's fine because once in a while we can use something that's not like every other movie out there. And of course, it gave us Kronk. And where would he I can't talk today. Where would society be without prompt? All right. Atlantis, the Lost Empire, was a critical and financial bomb, one of several from this period of time. I'm putting in B tier, but only here, because while I do like the characters and the animation is actually very interesting. It's almost kind of comic book-esque in the way it looks. The story is very clumsy, and there's a twist that is both obvious but also sudden and strange. It's hard to explain. Okay, Lilo and Stitch. I'm putting in A tier for now. I can see it going into S tier because it is a great movie. It is the best movie from this period of time. It's very emotional and it's very entertaining. It has a very well written and very well executed family dynamic, even if it isn't the most interesting story in the world. Well, I shouldn't say interesting, I should just say not the most original story in the world. The Treasure Planet. I'm putting this in higher B. And it's another one that's got a something of a large cult following, but this movie was a gigantic bomb. Like a very, very large one, and Disney suffered for it. And that's a good reason why a lot of people don't know about it. But it's got a lot going for it. Especially the two main characters. Well, I shouldn't say two main characters, because the main character, like Jim and then John Silver. Like those two and their dynamic is definitely the best thing about the movie. And the animation is very good, but I can't. I'm sorry, but the fact that there are these giant, old-fashioned like boats floating through space with people dressed in old-fashioned clothing in space with futuristic weapons is a little distracting. Like, why not actually make it all futuristic? That would be a little more interesting now. Okay, we got Brother Bear. D tier. It's just, it's not a very good movie. The characters are not likable. Okay, the two main characters are both assholes, honestly. It's kind of it's a waste of really good animation, which is sad. Phil Collins' songs this time are not good, especially since one of them plays over what's supposed to be the most emotional moment in the entire movie, which, by the way, is very predictable. It doesn't work. It just does not work as a whole. Oh boy. Home on the Range. That was an E tier. This might be the most hated Disney movie of them all. I've seen a lot of rankings of Disney movies. It's the one I've seen at the bottom of the lists the most often. It's bad, but it's not the worst thing in the world. It's kind of like The Rescuers or The Aristocats, where it's more forgettable than anything else. It's just a stupid piece of fluff that's just a bunch of noise to show your 2-year-old, which is not something Disney should waste their time making. So, yeah, it does deserve to go as low as it is. Chicken Little goes in F tier. This is the worst film in the Disney canon. is terrible. It's one of the worst animated films I've ever seen. It's lazy, it's obnoxious, it's ugly, and it's horribly mean-spirited, and I never want to watch it again. They Meet the Robinsons. God, that was weird. God, where is it? It goes in low beat here. Because this movie had... Actually, you know what? I'm putting this a little higher. This movie deserves some more attention because it does a lot of things right. I really like the message of perseverance. I do like the characters who are actually focused on, especially the bowler hat guy. I could watch a lot more of the bowler hat guy. And it's very imaginative, but there's a lot of also random goofy stuff going on that could have been cut. And it does move too quickly, and the time travel logic doesn't make a lot of sense. And one of the major twists of the movie does lead it to be kind of anticlimactic, but I recommend you giving it a shot if you haven't. Okay. Bolt is an okay movie that goes in the C tier. Yeah, it's fine, really. I don't have a lot to say about it. And like I said, I'm having less to say about these movies as I go on. And as you might have noticed by now, I don't have a script of any kind. Just because I thought this time I wouldn't need one, but I'm obviously wrong about that. This would have been going on a lot better if I did. So now we enter what some call the revival age, where Disney started to do a lot better financially and critically, because we get the first hand-drawn Disney film in quite some time at the time with The Princess and the Frog. Sorry. This was really refreshing, wasn't it, this movie? Because it had been so long. We got an African-American Disney princess, even though they didn't need to make a deal out of that. Like a big deal out of that. And yeah, she spends a good deal of the movie as a frog. I can see why people would have problems with that. Not a fan of all the music, but I do think the songs that are good are really, really good. And Dr. Facilier is the last great Disney villain. And I really like him more than ever now, because I am 100% convinced that he inspired a certain character in a certain pilot made on YouTube, who I am a very big fan of. And to those of you watching who know me, you know exactly who I'm talking about. Tangled. This, if The Princess and the Frog wasn't a good enough return to form, Tangled definitely would be. Because it feels like a genuine original, not so much original, but classic Disney fairy tale with something of a more modern feel, but not to an obnoxious level, like something like, Enchanted. If you watch that movie, that movie just mocks Disney as much as it wants, despite the fact that it's made by Disney. I'm not a huge fan of Enchanted. Just putting that out there. Tangled is a lot more good-natured in how it treats itself in a more lighthearted way, because it's not like a DreamWorks wannabe or anything. despite the way it looks, it's still very Disney uh, feel, feeling, and it's a great movie. Oh, look at that! There's another Winnie the Pooh movie that's theatrically released, and I do find it weird that it's only called Winnie the Pooh. That's kind of weird, and B, it was released in 2011. What a I don't know. Is it just me, or is it weird they'd release a Winnie the Pooh movie in theaters at that time, like that late? I don't know. That could just be me. I like this movie. I'm sorry. I do really like this movie, and I'm putting it in B tier for the same reasons I like the Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh. It's very charming. It's very quaint and likable, and again, that childlike wonder that it manages to recapture. But somehow it's also comedic, which for the most part isn't a problem. But sometimes it's distracting, and there are one or two jokes that are honestly kind of cynical. Or, okay, make that one, but it's one too many. But it's a personal, well, it's one that I personally really like. Wreck-It Ralph goes in A tier. Now this is a feel-good movie. It it's a movie where you care about all of the characters. You want to see them succeed in what they do. It's creative in what it does with the video game world. I personally am not as bothered with the fact that they don't explore more video games because I'm not a gamer. That might have something to do with it. Well, that does have something to do with it. No, am I kidding? It also has one of. It probably has the best twist villain out of any movie in the Disney canon. And the animation lends itself very well to the movie because you'll notice that it varies in style depending on the game setting in terms of frame rate and texture and whatnot. I find that very admirable. And then we have Frozen. Oh boy, I really don't know where to put this one, honestly. When this movie first came out, I loved it. A lot of us did. It was praised and regarded as this huge revival for Disney, well, the best Disney film since The Lion King, and it made so much money. And the only movie they've made from this canon that has made more money is The Seagull Here. Honestly, I still really like this movie, but I don't think it's quite. It's not as good as I think it is now because I haven't really rewatched it, but judging by what I know about it from what I've thought about, its popularity has definitely gone downhill since it first came out. And that's probably because it's not as amazing as we all thought, but I do think it's still at least good. I'm right now going to put it at a low A. Probably the lowest A. Big Hero 6 kind of falls into that same category, but more so to me than to others. Because I had a great time watching this in the theater, but it does definitely have its fair share of problems. It is going in B tier because it's not the most original story, and it might have the worst twist villain. I'm sorry, that the villain in this movie really does not work. It's it's very predictable, and the way his character changes is so drastic and unnatural. But visually, it's very creative. The, the characters are very likable. Baymax is obviously a standout. Like, he's definitely the best thing about the movie. I still really like the movie, but it's it's high in the B tier, but I'm going to put it there for now. Zootopia goes in S tier. This is my favorite movie from the revival age. It's another one that I don't think I can add much to because of how utterly intelligent and creative it is in its world, in its designs, in what it stands for, and what it symbolizes. Because you could argue what's on the nose, but I think we kind of need that, or we, no, not even at the time, we still kind of need that to have that like pounded into our minds, to know that people are not treated as well as they should be, depending on how different they are from others, and it's really something that needs to be addressed, as bad as that is, because it's not something you should have to address. And back to the movie itself, the two main characters have a lot of great exchanges, they have great chemistry, they themselves are very likable, but it also, if Big Hero 6 doesn't have the worst twist villain, Zootopia might. Because that's definitely the weakest part of that movie. I noticed that I keep ending my brief descriptions with something negative, and I'm sorry about that. Hopefully I can change that. Moana. I'm going to put this in A tier. Put it in here for now. It's a personal favorite of mine. Because it is, yeah, it's kind of a basic Chosen One movie. But it's a very entertaining one. It's a very fun, it's just a very, very fun ride. It's beautiful looking. It has an excellent soundtrack. And I really like the characters. It's fun. It's just, that's the best thing I can think of to call it. It's a very fun movie. Ralph Breaks the Internet. You know, when I saw this movie in theaters, I actually thought it was good. In hindsight, I'm having trouble believing why I thought it was even really passable, because I'm putting it in D tier. Because it's actually really not very good. Because it's got so much blatant product placement. The characters are so off from how they were in the first movie. And it honestly, it kind of disregards the first movie in a way that is not. It's so strange to watch that, though. It it almost goes against the first movie in both narrative logic and rules and in character. And it's not very creative either. It's a movie that I, damn it, it it's one that it's like Pocahontas, where it's surprising that I thought it was that good in the first place. Finally, we have Frozen 2, which I'm putting in C tier for now. It's nowhere near as good as the first one. It's not a bad movie, but it's average, more so that it's more average than anything else. It's got a lot of problems. There's things it doesn't follow through with. It mostly only focuses on Elsa, kind of also Anna. Other characters get completely pushed to the side. There's a lot of other things that get introduced, but are just not interesting. Like they try to add depth to the characters' pasts by introducing these other characters and revealing these other things, but in a way I almost don't care, because by the time we get to that moment in the movie where we see that reveal, at least when I was watching it, I was kind of just losing interest as a whole. But it overall does have a better soundtrack than the first movie, even though none of its songs are as good as something like Let It Go. Because let's face it, as often as Let It Go has been played and as done we all might be with it, there's a reason why it was as popular as it was. None of the songs in Frozen 2 are as good, but the quality is a lot more consistent because there's no fixer-upper in there, which might just be, okay, it's not the worst, but it's one of the worst Disney songs ever. And Frozen 2 is also um, better looking than the first one, and honestly, as far as CG goes, probably any of the other ones. And we are done. Here is my tier list for every film in the Walt Disney animated anime. What is wrong with me? Do I have like a speech impediment? God, this is my tier list for every movie in the Walt Disney Animation Studios canon. It is subject to change. Opinions change. Speaking of which, I am entitled to my opinion. So don't at me. um, I apologize for the probably low quality of all of this, especially because of the way I've been talking. But I do hope you enjoyed this. So now, ladies, gentlemen, and that technical rainbow in between, I bid you good day. Okay, now I wish you good day. Let's pretend that didn't happen, right? Good. See you next time if there will be one. Good day.